Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Welcome to 2024. And what is that going to mean for us as web developers in the future? What are the things that I think you should be learning? What are the things that I'm going to be learning this year? I'm going to break down the top 3 things. In fact, really the only 3 things that I would suggest learning this year on top of the stuff that you probably already know. I think we all know that, JavaScript, React, the basic foundational stuff that's going to probably get you a job. But what are some new things that are happening this year? And what are some things you should be looking for to learn that maybe you're not learning at your boot camp, maybe you haven't learned at a previous program, maybe you're already working as a developer and you want to know, how do you keep fresh? How do you keep your skills fresh? Because in this profession, you're just going to be expected to keep up with the trends. So what are the top 3 things that I think you right now listening, should be aware of and studying? Pretty simple stuff. TypeScript, Next.js, and OpenAI, but not in the way that you're probably thinking. I don't think that you should become a prompt engineer or whatever the heck that means. What does it even mean to be a prompt engineer, by the way? Like literally a person writing prompts. I've had people reach out to me and tell me this is the future. I've read tons of posts. If you're on Twitter or X, you've seen people that write whole books on this apparently. Like, here, take my 50 best prompts to become the best chat prompt engineer at your work and all this kind of stuff. I don't think that's the future at all. That's not a future that I really want to be invested in. But these 3 things that I'm going to break down for you, how to learn them and why you should, these are going to be really, really valuable. So first off, TypeScript, people said it was waning in popularity last year, but it's one of those things that's just here to stay. It is becoming more of a prerequisite on job applications. When they're looking for new developers, they're saying, hey, do you know TypeScript? If you're a junior developer, it's more expected that you're just going to have to know some TypeScript. It used to be sufficient, I think, for people that have more years and seniority. It's sufficient to say, hey, I know JavaScript really well, and I'm down to learn TypeScript. Sure, yeah, I can learn it. Kind of like if you have a few years of experience and you worked primarily in JavaScript, and they say, well, we use C# or we use Ruby. And they say, okay, well, you're just a good programmer. We don't care necessarily that you've only used JavaScript for 5 years. We're going to assume, since you've been working for 5 years writing complex software, that you're going to have no trouble at all jumping into our code base using a different language. Now, with junior developers and people who are going for these more entry-level roles or don't have a lot of experience behind them, I do think it's really important that you take the time to learn some TypeScript. And it doesn't have to be a really difficult process. If you know JavaScript, you're halfway there. At the end of the day, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. It's adding static types to the language of JavaScript. And you can think about it like this. Let's say you declare a variable like cat. You say, let cat equal in strings cat. To write that in a TypeScript way, which would be completely useless for this example here, you'd say, let cat colon, and then the type of data that cat is. What is cat in this case? It's a string. Why on earth would you ever want to do this? Well, there's a few reasons. A big issue that web dev teams or teams write JavaScript or loosely typed languages, dynamic languages, which do not have any type checking. Basically, you can write a variable and you don't need to tell it, hey, this is the type of a variable it is. It'll have this property on it. It should be like this. It can't be blank. Sometimes you would get variables and data that you'd send to a server, which has a database maybe that it communicates with. That database would expect the data in a certain format. And databases are not forgiving like JavaScript. You can't give it a 1 in quotes and expect it to pump out a 1 as a number, and that can lead to all sorts of really not so fun errors that can happen when you're working with full stack web applications or even just debugging stuff. Or what about when developers want to work on a really large code base and they're using a utility function that may be some other file somewhere, but they don't know what types they can give to the utility function. It makes them have to do some more research, understand things. It's just not a great experience, which is kind of why TypeScript was invented. A little bit of a background on TypeScript, by the way. It was created by the same guy that created C#. Microsoft reached out and got him to do it. So my kind of inside joke that maybe no one else laughs at is that it's basically C# for JavaScript developers. Kind of what I feel like. It's like, okay, strongly typed, a little bit of a different syntax and patterns that people use with it. And C# developers tend to feel more comfortable with it. And I think with Angular using TypeScript and a lot of developers on the Microsoft stack, it became really, really popular. Anyway, enough about that little side bit of history there in case you cared at all. I don't know, maybe you didn't. But now at least you know. So how do you learn this? Quite simply, you can go to the docs. I actually, in this case, would create a TypeScript project on Code Sandbox or CodePen.io. I believe Code Sandbox is probably a better environment to do this with, and you can just start experimenting with writing TypeScript in an environment that will compile down to JavaScript. That could be a really good way for you to start writing functions. Maybe try to approach a problem you've solved in the past, like maybe some sort of little problem you've done on LeetCode, or a challenge you've received from a company, or just some sort of fun challenge like Advent of Code. Try to redo the answer that you may have gotten before in JavaScript and rewrite it in TypeScript. This is one of my favorite ways to learn something new. Like, for example, I wanted to learn Rust last year. I didn't. By the way, I tried and I thought this is really cool. I know a little bit of Rust being notoriously difficult to learn. So I learned a little bit, and the way I did it was I took a project that I'd already done using Node Express JavaScript, and I said, I'm going to now rewrite that in Rust. That way I'm not like reinventing the wheel. I kind of know how it should work already, so I have a bit more familiarity with it. And this gave me a great introduction to say, well, how do I do this thing that I'm used to doing in JavaScript, but in Rust? With TypeScript, you can do the same thing. You say, what is this thing I'm used to doing in JavaScript? Now, how can I do that with TypeScript? Once you get down to some really basics, and the basics being declaring types, generics, and what are some other things that might be really useful to know? Mapped types, I think that's more advanced. But honestly, I think you can get away with just knowing how to declare types, interfaces, and then how to use generics. Generics being types that can be generic. They can accept other types as an argument. Anyway, if you look at something like a promise, the promise type is a great example of a type that's a generic. I'm not going to go deep into types here. I think that's something you should do on your own. It's hard to explain coding concepts over this kind of format. This is something you really need to see and play with on your own. There is a learning curve to it, like with anything else you do, but this will make you feel a lot more confident that when you go to an interview next time and they ask you, hey, so do you know any TypeScript? And you say, oh, I'd like to learn it. You say, oh yeah, I'm actually working on it right now. And I do understand this. When you go there and they ask you some very basic questions, you'll be able to answer them easily, right? Which leads me to Next.js. This is another great place for you to start learning TypeScript. Next.js lends itself very well to TypeScript. It is a framework that enables server-side rendering, which we'll get to in just a second. It is the React framework which you're going to want to use in 2024. I wrote a spicy post on LinkedIn a few months ago. I said, create React app is dead. Next.js is king. And people flooded my comments with all sorts of mean takes on it. They're a hot take about why I was wrong. And oh no, create React app is never going to die. And we're going to use it for the eternity in Next.js. And I think you guys have completely missed the ball. I'm going to double down on that statement. Create React app is dead. No longer going to be the most popular thing to use. And if you're using it for a new project, you've already too late to the party. Next.js is what you should be using. Why? The React team and Next.js have intertwined, right? They are working with each other. If you go to the react.dev documents, the official React documents, and you want to start up a new full stack project, what do you think they recommend? They do not recommend create React app anymore. They recommend you use Next.js, which is exactly why I said create React app is dead. I didn't mean dead like no one's ever going to use it. I meant dead like it's not the thing you should be using, and even the React team knows you shouldn't be using it. So what is the big deal with Next.js? I'm going to break down a little bit about server-side rendering and client-side rendering so that you know how to speak intelligently about it, and also so that you understand the benefits and the key differences between them. So that way you realize that, Next.js actually solves a problem. It wasn't just some cool new toy that we all decided to just switch over to, which, by the way, that does happen in web development oftentimes. So there was a period of time when people wanted to do client-side rendered apps. This is like your typical create React app. This was a client-side CSR app. What it does is you have HTML in the browser, which JavaScript will render. So you'll send some HTML to the browser from a server, right? That HTML will include some JavaScript. That JavaScript will then fetch more data from the server. What are some of the benefits of that? Web applications with a lot of user interactions. You click on something, and maybe you click on a button, and you get shown a house listing, for example. Maybe you're on Airbnb and you're clicking around and you want to see some stuff, and you click on something, and something happens as a result of that click. What are the problems with that? Sounds like a pretty good thing, right? The problem with this is that the initial load can be pretty slow. Sometimes when web crawlers go on the page, so let's say you sent the HTML file to the browser, and it's like, cool. And you send some JavaScript too. It's like, cool. Now I got to use that JavaScript to go fetch more stuff. You clicked on something, now I got to go fetch some more stuff. Or maybe you only sent me an HTML shell, and I'm going to use all the JavaScript that you sent me to go fetch the rest of the page. You ever see that loading spinner on a page? That means JavaScript is going out fetching stuff. What's the big deal with that? Here's the big deal, my friend. SEO, search engine optimization. Google and other browsers have these little web crawlers. I think of them like a little spider in my head. They go around crawling around on websites. They go to the site and they say, hey, what's on this site? They then take that information and index it. They keep some information about what was on that page. And that way, when you search for something like your local dentist or, the best podcast in the world, and you find this one, you find it because of SEO. It means it went to the page, it saw what was on it, saw some information about it, and it let people know what was on the page. So you come up first in the Google rankings or something like that. If you have an e-commerce business, this is insanely important, right? You cannot have devalued SEO. If you're doing like an internal web application, then having, not so great SEO, that could be reasonable. In fact, it could be not something you care about at all. But for the majority of public-facing companies, this is very, very important. So if you are, having a spinner on the screen when the web crawler goes there, it's like, wait a second, I don't even know what's here. So it bounces, it doesn't know, and it can't index you properly, and you suffer as a result. So why are people switching to SSR? We talked about CSR, client-side rendering. What about SSR, server-side rendering? This is basically, we're just taking the initial load. We're saying, hey, instead of you, client, browser, instead of you doing all that work to fetch all the data and make the page functional, how about we do all that on the server before it even gets to the browser? So I got an idea. The server will render all the stuff, and we'll make a complete HTML file, and we'll send it to you immediately on that load. This is really SEO friendly because now when the crawler goes there, it's like, oh, cool, I see everything's here. So the user sees the content faster. It improves the perceived performance. But here's some of the other issues. It can increase the server load and the complexity of what's going on at the server level. If you're writing JavaScript, you kind of take for granted that you're just working within the browser. So you're doing things like window, maybe using some other browser APIs, local storage. Maybe you're doing a click event or something like that. That is not so easy to have happen on the server. Luckily, there are some ways where you can like mix and match server rendered stuff with client side rendered stuff. And that's the beauty of using something like Next.js. They took all this into account, and they really left a lot of backdoors open for you to do client side rendering and server side rendering, but they definitely optimize for server side rendering. This makes your applications so much better for SEO. And there's a reason why a lot of companies, especially big companies that are public facing, that do e-commerce stuff, they're using server-side rendering. So hopefully I've sold you on the benefits of Next.js. And I'll be honest, sometimes you got to learn stuff just because you got to learn stuff. If you see a mega trend in software like Next.js, you're going to need to learn it. Whether you like it, agree with it, you don't agree with it, whatever, for job security, for your own benefit as a developer, you're going to want to learn that stuff. So you're going to need to put that in your wheelhouse. Luckily at Parsity, that was one of the biggest changes we've done. We are introducing TypeScript and now Next.js in our curriculum. We're going into AWS next. We're doing all the things that are just become mega trends in the industry that too many boot camps are just saying, maybe next year, or they're trying to fool themselves into thinking that this is not something they need to take advantage of and be aware of. Really, really important. So Next.js, how do you learn that, by the way? Next.js has excellent docs, and as a prerequisite to learning Next.js, you really need to learn React. That's a must-have. You need to know React before you can dive into Next.js. There's tons of places to learn React. I'm not going to go into all that. Again, I would use Code Sandbox. Code Sandbox being one of my favorite tools. By the way, I'm not sponsored by them or I don't get paid anything. They don't even know I exist. Why am I telling you to use them? Really easy to scaffold a little app using Next.js, TypeScript, and then get right down to business and see the rendering within the browser right there. It's just like CodePen, but with like way more complex frameworks you can use. You can use TypeScript with Next. You can use Create React App if you really, really want. You could use Vite. You could use Remix. You could use all the cool frameworks that are out there really easily, and it gives you the same experience as having it within like VS Code on your machine. Super cool. Now here's the last one I'm going to go over. Leveraging OpenAI API. Why am I doing this? Why do I think this is important? I actually just made a challenge to do this that I will give out. It's actually going to be pinned to this episode. And if you don't see it there, reach out to me. I think this is a really cool project. I think there's a lot of great use cases for using OpenAI, not just ChatGPT. Now, as developers, we almost take for granted that we think everybody's using ChatGPT. We're like, oh yeah, everybody's using ChatGPT, right? I mean, who's not? Here's the big thing. A lot of people aren't. Up to 50% of US citizens, I believe, don't really use ChatGPT. Of the other 50% that do, not many use it on a daily basis. Now, developers tend to use it like way above average. We're using tools like Copilot in our daily work. We're very used to AI tools. They're only going to get better. They're only going to get more ubiquitous as we go further into 2024. I'm not one of those people that's sitting around saying, oh my God, my job, is an AI robot going to take over my job? I don't think that kind of thinking is useful, and I don't also see it as reality. And also, even if it is reality, there's nothing I can do about it. So instead of having my brain run in circles about things that I have zero control over, I like to worry about things I can control, which is my skill set and my knowledge and what I'm going to do with this technology. I think it's really cool. So ChatGPT is a large language model. I am not a data scientist. I wanted to be for a while, but I never pursued it far enough. I wish I had. It was a really cool opportunity I wish I had taken. Anyway, I still always had this bug in me that wanted to be like part of data science. And when I saw that OpenAI has an API that you can use, I jumped on it. I put $100 into the API billing system to get $100 worth of credits to use. Yeah, it's not free, by the way. I think everybody looking for free stuff all the time is a very quick way to have a very not fun career as a developer. If you're only looking for free, inferior tools to do things, then you'll be locked into those free inferior tools. Anything worth using is generally going to cost some money. I think you can put $10 into this payment token system, and you could have a ton of fun for quite a long time with just $10 down. So don't be afraid to spend a little bit of money to learn how to use it. So why should you learn how to use it? There's a proliferation of startups that I've seen on sites like wellfound.com, which are startup job sites. And I see that most of these companies aren't really AI companies. They kind of build themselves as AI companies. But what it seems like they're really doing is they're using OpenAI API in a very clever way. I'll give you a couple examples. I use some content creation tools, Hype Fury, and I also use Taplio. What these do is they will find your writing style. They'll look at enough of your writing style and then offer you suggestions based on your writing style and high performing tweets and posts that you've done, and then give you some examples of like, here, like this what you wrote tends to sound like this, and here's an example of a tweet we think would do well based on your previous writing. Really, really cool. And I was willing to pay $20 a month for it. I think some people pay $50 to $100 a month depending on the tier that they opted into. What I'm saying is there's a lot of companies that are going to be doing this, and a lot more companies that are going to get very, very wealthy doing this, and they are hiring developers not to create their own large language models, which will take decades or take some Herculean effort like the people at OpenAI did, where they basically scraped the entire internet and trained some models on it for years, and now they are reaping the rewards. They're also seeing some of the backlash and legal ramifications of doing that. So I don't think we're going to see a lot more people trying to go down that route. I think we're going to see people thinking, what can we make around their API that's going to help people out? Could we make a fitness tracker that looks at your body and then tells you how much fat is on your body, and then maybe tells you what kind of food you should be eating, or looks at your weight and your daily calorie intake and gives you updated advice based on that? Now, you could put that into ChatGPT yourself, obviously, but if you trained the model based on some things that you wanted it to say, then you could potentially make something really, really interesting that was very specific. Think of a chatbot on steroids. Think of something that could do sales for you. Think of something that could write code for you based on some code that you provided it. Maybe using a language or a syntax or something that's unfamiliar to ChatGPT currently. Remember, ChatGPT doesn't stay up to date with the most current events. It can't. Also, if you're asking it something really obscure, it's not going to know. And even if you do the plugins which allow you to search the internet, it's often not enough. If you are an expert on something and you want to train ChatGPT using fine tuning, you can do that. In fact, the exercise that I'm attaching to this podcast allows you to do just that. I think it's really cool. You can fine tune a model, giving it a bunch of data to train it. And then when you ask it a question, it will use that model to then offer you suggestions based on the question you ask it. What are the possibilities with this? Like we just talked about content creation. You could do something for like fitness. You could do something for a coding model that generates code based on some training you've given it. It could be a resume writer, which is the example that I've given in the free challenge that I've attached here. So there's all sorts of cool ways to do it. I think more and more companies are not only going to want you to know how to do this, they're going to expect you to know how to do this. They're not going to be wanting to hire their own AI team. If you're a startup with, let's say, a budget for 10 to 20 to even 30 developers, I don't think you're going to have the money, the power, the infrastructure to onboard a set of AI engineers to deploy models at scale and train them at scale. What you're going to want your full stack developers to be able to do is say, hey, you know what? I know how to use OpenAI API. I know how to train a model. And I also know how to use it over, I know how to expose it via HTTP requests or something like that, like what you'll see in the challenge I provided. Basically, can you make like an endpoint where a person could ask it a question and then return a response? Maybe we could use that on our site and train chatbots or whatever, right? The possibilities are kind of endless, right? There's all sorts of cool stuff. I think that you as a developer, maybe you're learning how to code. Maybe you know how to code. Maybe you're just considering it. Maybe you want to hire a developer to do this. I think you should be thinking, what could you build around ChatGPT? Maybe your goal as a developer is not just to get hired from somebody else to do something for them. You could make small apps that you could put a paywall in front of, like using Stripe, whatever, and build something using this and then like sell it. Honestly, nowadays, using Next.js, using OpenAI API and putting a billing payment system like Stripe in front of it and saying, hey, you can log in, but you can only use this feature if you pay $10 a month, and then marketing it on a site like Twitter or Facebook or wherever you're at, you can get users that pay money. I guarantee you can if it's any good. And one way to see if it's any good is just by asking the community. Maybe if you solve a problem for yourself, I can almost guarantee you that other people have that problem. Now, the way you solve it and the convenience and what people are willing to pay for it are different topics, right? But I think most people have an interesting idea in them that may not make them a millionaire, but it may be something that can gain them a little bit of money, and if nothing else, will be a really, really cool side project. So I hope you get a big kick out of the side project which I've included here, and if this is way above your head and you're thinking, man, I don't even know how to approach this problem, I want you to join us at dev30.xyz, where you'll learn JavaScript over 30 days for a price which is ridiculous. It's like $50, and we'll teach you for 30 days how to learn in public, build cool stuff in JavaScript. And if you pass the course and you want to learn how to be a full stack developer and maybe do a bunch of cool stuff with OpenAI and building full stack applications using all the technologies I've talked about, you'll be eligible for a massive discount to Parsity, which is obviously a good deal because we're way ahead of people and they're just not. They can't keep up. I'd like to see another boot camp keeping up with all this stuff going on, and we're only going to add more stuff. We're only going to keep improving things. I'm juiced about the future. I hope you are too. Hope your 2024 is off to an excellent start. I hope you have fun with this challenge. And if you can't do the challenge and you want to learn JavaScript, I hope we see you in Dev30 and we can chat on Slack together in the future. I'm out. Have a great start of the year, and I will talk to you later. Bye. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.